Hi, I'm Dongshang. Welcome to Digging into China, where we explore China in depth to review unique perspectives. Since 2022, following the end of the pandemic, China's revenue from land sales has plummeted at an alarming rate. In 2019, land sales generated an impressive 7.8 trillion yuan for governments across China. By 2024, however, annual land sale revenue had fallen to just 4.87 trillion yuan, a staggering 38% decline in only 5 years. When I reviewed last year's land sale figures earlier this year, I was already astonished by the rapid drop in revenue. Yet, even more shocking data emerged in July. When the Chinese government released the figures for state-owned land use rights transfers for the first half of 2025, from January to June, land sale revenue totaled a mere 1.13 trillion yuan. If we project this forward, the full-year revenue for 2025 would be approximately 2.26 trillion yuan, only 46% of last year's total, not even half of 2024's revenue, and a dramatic 71% drop compared to 2019 before the pandemic. Historically, revenue from state-owned land use rights transfers was a cornerstone of fiscal income for local governments in China. Since former Premier Zhu Rongji's housing market reforms, land sale revenues had steadily increased, peaking in 2021 at 8.5 trillion yuan in a single year, surpassing the largest tax category, value-added tax, which brought in 6.35 trillion yuan that year. However, the wave of mortgage defaults that began during the pandemic triggered a sharp decline in second-hand housing prices, dragging the entire real estate market down with it. Despite the government's strict price controls on new homes to curb falling prices, the massive sell-off of foreclosed and second-hand properties overwhelmed these measures. The real estate sector, being highly leveraged, faced catastrophic consequences when prices fell beyond what the leverage could bear, impacting both developers and home buyers. On the supply side, major developers like Evergrande collapsed, leaving behind a vast number of unfinished projects. On the demand side, home buyers caught in a frenzy of selling due to defaults fostered an overwhelmingly pessimistic market outlook. Once the upward price trend broke, the high leverage nature of the industry led to relentless cascading failures until all heavily leveraged participants were eliminated. Despite the Chinese government's repeated assertions of stabilizing and bolstering the real estate market, and despite some social media accounts swayed by government interests claiming that housing prices have bottomed out and stabilized, the reality is that China's real estate market this year has not only failed to recover, but is declining faster than ever. This is the primary reason why government land sale revenue in the first half of this year was halved compared to last year. With the real estate market stalled and the land sales drying up, the land-based fiscal system has collapsed, depriving local governments of 7 to 8 trillion yuan in annual revenue. What can be done? Can they rely on transfer payments from the central government? In 2024, the central government's general public budget revenue was only 10 trillion yuan. If local government's shortfall of 7 to 8 trillion yuan had to be covered centrally, where could the funds come from to build warships, missiles, and fighter jets for military preparedness? This is not to mention the billions spent annually on nations like North Korea, Russia, and countries in Africa and Latin America. The central government simply cannot cover this massive fiscal gap. For an authoritarian regime, a lack of funds undermines its ability to maintain centralized control, posing a threat as significant as the US deploying intermediate-range missiles in the Philippines and Japan. With the land-based fiscal system in ruins, where will government revenue come from? Recent judicial interpretations mandating Social Security contributions and aggressive pursuit of personal income tax on overseas earnings indicate that China's fiscal system is swiftly shifting from land-based to population-based revenue. What does population-based revenue entail? Essentially, it combines a poll tax with personal income tax together. The foundation is the poll tax stemming from the Supreme Court's August judicial interpretation mandating that nearly all Chinese citizens pay Social Security contributions, a de facto poll tax. In China, if you are not employed, you theoretically don't have to pay Social Security. However, if you have children, schools will not enroll them unless you pay. Thus, even without a job, you are compelled to contribute. In the future, we are likely to see further restrictions such as bans on opening bank accounts, attending university, or applying for civil service positions for non-payers. These policies all aim to enforce the Social Security poll tax. Beyond this foundational revenue, the government is intensifying efforts on the second layer, personal income tax. In July and August, many Chinese citizens with overseas investment income were pursued for personal income tax. Although Social Security and personal income tax have only recently gained media attention, the government began transitioning from land-based to population-based revenue as early as 2022, when signs of a real estate market collapse emerged. Consider the data. In 2024, Social Security enrollment grew by 0.6% year-on-year, reaching 1.7 billion people. Revenue from the three major social insurance funds, basic pension, unemployment, and work-related injury insurance, totaled 8.5 trillion yuan, a 7% increase, or 560 billion yuan more than the previous year. While enrollment grew by just 0.6%, fund revenue rose by 7%, indicating a significant increase in individual contributions. Looking at the prior years, in 2023, enrollment grew by 1.27%, reaching 1.7 billion people, with fund revenue at 11.15 trillion yuan, up 8.84%. In 2022, enrollment increased by 2.36%, with fund revenue at 7.15 trillion yuan, up 337.8 billion yuan, or 5%. In 2021, enrollment grew by 3%, with the fund revenue at 6.82 trillion yuan, up 34.6%. Excluding 2020's pandemic-related anomalies, 2019 appears normal, with enrollment growth of 2.66% and fund revenue growth of 3.6%. These figures reveal that starting in 2021, Social Security revenue growth began outpacing enrollment growth, signaling a shift to population-based revenue. This discrepancy reflects a sharp rise in Social Security contribution bases. In Beijing, the base surged from 3,613 yuan in 2020 to 7,162 yuan today, nearly doubling in 5 years. In Shanghai, contributions rose from 4,927 yuan to 7,460 yuan, a 51.4% increase. Since the 2020 pandemic, China has faced widespread unemployment and mortgage defaults, with tragedies unfolding daily. Yet, rather than alleviating citizens' burdens, the government, driven by the collapse of land-based revenue, has intensified Social Security poll tax collection to sustain its extravagant expenditures. Turning to personal income tax. On September 17, 2025, the Ministry of Finance reported fiscal data for January to August. Tax revenue totaled 12.11 trillion yuan, up just 0.02% year-on-year. Value-added tax grew by 3.2%, corporate income tax by 0.7%, personal income tax by 8.9%, and consumption tax by 2%. While overall tax revenue stagnated, personal income tax surged. Last year in 2024, total tax revenue was 17.5 trillion yuan, down 3.4%. Domestic value-added tax fell 3.8%, but personal income tax dropped only 1.7%, indicating relative growth. The two layers of population-based revenue, Social Security poll tax and personal income tax, have grown rapidly, outpacing average tax revenue growth. This marks the advent of the population-based fiscal era, a regression for China's economy. Land-based revenue tied to economic growth was flexible, requiring the government to foster development to increase income. In contrast, only personal income tax in a population-based system is linked to economic growth. Social Security poll taxes, rigid and unaffected by economic fluctuations, create a breathing tax where citizens must pay as long as they earn. This makes the government indifferent to economic performance. As long as there are people, revenue is stable. Why did the government choose population-based revenue? China's household registration system, or Hukou, provides a robust foundation for social control and tax collection. Since the Qing Dynasty 2,100 years ago, governments have used the Hukou to track population and ensure accurate taxation, tying it to state functions like a corvée labor, poll tax levied via Hukou, prevent evasion and restrict population mobility, enhancing control. This explains why China, despite its modern ID system, retains the Hukou. It's the government's lifeline. Without it, population-based revenue would collapse, and so would the regime. While population-based revenue may temporarily rescue the government, it brings severe consequences. First, it drastically reduces household income, already declining relative to GDP. By diverting income to the government, it stifles consumption, contradicting calls to boost spending and a deepening economic decline. Second, unlike a property tax, poll taxes ignore wealth, discouraging population growth. As taxes are tied to population size, many may avoid having children, leading to a potential population collapse. Historically, even in China's backward feudal era, poll taxes were reformed and abolished. The Tang Dynasty, the two-tax system, shifted taxation to assets and land, promoting fairness and economic growth. The Ming Dynasty's single whip reform consolidated taxes into silver payments, easing burdens on landless farmers. The Qing Dynasty's Yongzheng-era spreading ding into mu reform abolished the poll taxes entirely, tying taxation to land and sparking a population boom from 109 million in 1734 to nearly 300 million by 1795. China's vast labor force today owes much to Yongzheng's abolition of poll taxes. Yet, 300 years later, their return signals a regression. Is this a mockery of modern society by the outdated Qing Dynasty? Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my videos to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.